All right, so good morning again, everybody. This is going to be our follow-up number 5, meaning we're going to be dealing with the assignments that you have to submit for month 5. These are a little bit different than others that we've seen before, even the ones that we saw last month, which still had to do with Clover. But this month, we are dealing with vowel teams and R-controlled sounds, which are peculiar in a way because we're not going to be going over rules. We're not going to be going over, identifying syllable types and things like that. It's more about exposure to different words that have a particular vowel team or vowel sound. For example, the long A sound or the long E sound. There's several letter combinations or vowel teams that will make those sounds. So it's all about exposure to those type of words that have those vowel teams and not necessarily a syllable division rule as last month was. So what I'm going to do as usual is share my screen with you and go over some of the materials that will be useful for you as you get into, like I said, month 5, the vowel teams and the R-controlled sounds. So my screen should come up any second now. All right, and what I have opened up here is that Google Drive folder that, remember, I share with you every time that we have a meeting and I send you a follow-up email. There's always a link to a Google Drive folder. The link will take you to this. A bunch of different subfolders where you'll find materials for month 1, month 2, month 3. You guys are past that for the most part. I'll mention that later on, that I believe not everyone has sent in their lesson plans so far. But what I'm looking into right now, what we're going to focus on today, is going to be specifically month 5, and that's part 2 of Clover. There's 3 files. Let me zoom in a little bit here. There's 3 files in this folder. The first one that I'm going to go over is the presentation. It looks pretty similar to the ones that we've seen before. Then I'm going to cover the lesson plan template, which is similar to the one we saw last month for Clover, but it's a little bit different because of what I was mentioning regarding the vowel teams and the R-controlled sounds. I'm not learning rules. I'm just focusing on exposing my students to as many words with those vowel teams or with those R-controlled sounds as possible. So I adapted the lesson plan a little bit. That's why I put a different lesson plan here. And then I put a Google Slides document. That's the equivalent of what PowerPoint would be. So if you use Office products, you know PowerPoint. If you're familiar with Google Drive and all the cloud-based programs, Google Slides is the equivalent of PowerPoint. So I'll get to what this file has, but I believe you'll find it useful as you're writing your lesson plans and implementing the program in general. So I'm going to go ahead and start with the presentation. Let me go back to the first page. And we are on month 5. So the first thing that I want to talk about is the certification requirements for this month. You need to submit 3 different lesson plans. Remember, when we say submit the lesson plans, it means that you're going to fill in every single box in that lesson plan template. And we also want you to submit students' work, as well as point number 2 here, a video of you teaching one of those lessons. You choose which one of those 3 lessons you're going to do. And as I show you the different parts of the lesson plan today, you might want to make more than just 3 lesson plans, and you'll understand why in a minute. But if we see the first lesson plan that is listed, for example, it's vowel teams that make the long A sound. There's 6 different vowel teams that make the long A sound. You know your students. If 6 different vowel letter combinations is going to be too much for them to deal with in one single lesson, then you might want to do 2 lesson plans, one for the first 3 vowel teams that make the long A sound, and another for the other 3 vowel teams that make the long A sound. It's up to you. The requirement is that you do just one with all of them, with all of the long A sound vowel teams. But when you're coming to the actual implementation with a student, you might want to kind of break it down a little bit more. Same thing with the long E, same thing with the R controlled sounds. And remember that the video, it doesn't have to be one long, 30-minute, 1-hour video. It can be little chunks, little bits and pieces of what you're doing. We just want to be able to see that you are able to do every step and that you understand the concepts yourself and are able to deliver it to your student. So let's start talking about the lesson plan. Like I said, it's very similar to the one that we saw last month, but we adapted a little bit. In general, when it comes to Clover spelling rules, we're always going to adapt that lesson plan a little bit. But here I really wanted to send you already the adapted form because I thought it was going to be easier to explain and easier for you guys to understand the differences between the regular multisyllabic word lesson plan and this lesson plan that we're going to use for the vowel teams and the R controlled sounds. So I'll just go over the slides and we'll go over it that way. So the usual template used for Max Words, remember, includes Clover, spelling rules, prefixes and suffixes, and roots, has 7 steps. However, we will adapt it for the lesson plans dealing with vowel teams and R controlled sounds. Keep in mind that for these sections, there are no rules or concepts to remember, but it's all about exposure. So on this presentation, I put 2 links. One that takes you to the usual unedited Max Words lesson plan template that you're familiar with, and one that takes you to the one that I made. That's what I have. Oops, sorry. Computer's going crazy there. That's what I had opened up here on the side, and it's one of the files that I'm sharing with you on that Google Drive folder. So if you click on that second link here that says click here for adapted lesson template, this is what you'll be taken through. So I'll go through these steps on my slides. Remember, I take screenshots of this and put samples. So the steps as described on this adapted lesson plan that I made for you guys are also part of the presentation. So I'll cover them through here. Okay, so the first step is going to be the visual drill. Remember, this is where we always use cards to introduce the concept to our students. In this case, we're going to introduce the letter combination that makes the relevant sound and a sample word. Use several more index cards to expose the students to words that are relevant for the skill taught. In this case, for this presentation, I focused on the long A sounds, which is the first lesson plan that you need to submit this month. So we're going to use cards. I use digital cards that I make on PowerPoint. That's what I'm showing here. You can make index cards instead, whatever you prefer. So we're going to make cards that have, if you're doing an actual card, you're going to have the AI, the vowel team in the front, and then an example word with that vowel team in the back. Or you can present it like this, like I did with digital cards. So it's AI making the A sound, the long A sound, as in the word main. And this would be my additional cards that use that vowel team in different words. So I have snail, strain, aid, main, brain, bait, all of that long A sounds. Here, again, you can just do something like this, like I did on the computer, or you can do your individual index cards like I had showed you last time, the ones that I have for Clover and things like that. And on the initial training, I also showed them. And these would be those 6 different vowel teams or letter combinations, if you will, that make that long A sound. This is why I said you might want to split this lesson into 2 maybe even more, because the requirement is that you do one lesson plan for all these 6 vowel teams. But again, when it comes to the actual implementation with your students, that might be too much. You might want to spend a little bit more time with each spelling of that long A sound. And it might be easier to do so if you have 2 lesson plans or 3 lesson plans where you deal with less of this instead of just 6 altogether. But for the long A, these are all the sounds that in theory you would cover with your students. A as in main, A as in bay, A as in vein, A as in break, A as in pray, and A as in 8, all those long A sounds spelled differently. From the visual drill, again, you present the sound and a sample word, as well as some additional sample words for each of the different spellings. Then we have step 2, which is the auditory tactile drill. Usually, remember, this is where the students trace on a textured surface. So the instructions are that you give 5 to 10 words to the students that have the sound that you are teaching. They will trace the words on a textured surface. It can be, if you don't have anything handy, it can be the desk, it can be their forearm, anything is fine really. And you'll have a list of words and they'll just trace them. They're not writing them at this point, they're just tracing them with their finger. And all these words, as usual, the words that I include in my lesson plans, I get either from the software, clicking on the through the screens of the software, or on the material section. Remember, there's fluency sheets there, there's list of words, there's additional worksheets. So that's where I get all my examples. And then we have step 3. Realistically, or originally, step 3 is the sound blending. If you remember from last session that we had where we were going over the closed syllables, for example, and we had the word magnet, this step, the sound blending step, is where I would have the student do magnet and then tap out each of the syllables and then write it down. Here it's different. We can really tap out the sounds in a vowel team. So this is where I adapted this step. I'm still going to kind of blend things into a word, but I'm not going to do it by clapping. I'm not going to do it by tapping like that. And I changed the name, or I adapted the name of the exercise to word formation instead of sound blending. What I want to do here is give the students 5 to 10 words that have the sound that I'm teaching, in this case, the long A sound. I'll create letter cards, or you can use your alpha chips if you have them. And so create letter cards and sound cards. When I say sound cards here, I mean the long A sound cards that they can use to form the words. And I put some samples on the next slide. These are my cards that I would have. Sorry, let me turn off the notifications here. Okay, so these are the sound cards that I would have, the letter cards and the sound cards that I would have. On the top, I have the letters. Ideally, I would have the entire alphabet, right? At the bottom, I have my vowel teams. You'll see that it's all the vowel teams that make that long A sound in all the different variations. Of course, it's one card for the vowel team because the vowel combination or the letter combination makes that one sound. And in the middle, I'll have them form the word. Very similar to how we were using the alpha chips in the phonics, where we had one semicircle on top, one semicircle at the bottom with letters, and the word is formed in the middle. Same concept here. So I have my letters and my sound cards, my sound chips. And what I would tell the student is, remember, this is the word formation exercise, form the word bay. This is what I would expect them to do. Get the B, get the proper spelling of the A sound, and then I have the word bay. Form the word day. Same idea. Drag the D, take the proper spelling of the long A sound, and I have the word day. And again, this is where you can adapt it and decide how you're going to go through this lesson. Can my student deal with just one at a time? Should I just focus on the AY today and deal with the AI next week or next lesson? Or can I mix and match all of the different A sounds? And I'm going to have words that have all of the different spellings of the long A sounds. That's up to you and up to the student that you have at hand, and where they're at in identifying and being familiar with the different spellings of the long A. So then we get to the fluency. As usual, you're going to have word lists that you can get from the material section of your teacher dashboard. And you're going to have the students read as many words as possible in 60 seconds. At the end of that minute, you're going to give them a score, and the score will be how many words they read correctly. Here, let me just show you real quick. Ooh, didn't do that. Let me show you real quick what materials I have been using for the slides that I've shown you so far. So here in the materials, you would go into Max Words, of course. And I used for my presentation and for the cards that I made, I used this file, the one that says Module 1 Clover Additional Worksheets. I used this one mostly, the one that says Module 1 Clover Fluency Words. And I wanted to show you this one just because I don't want you to get confused. You're going to open it and see closed syllables at the beginning. You probably were using this file when you were doing the lesson plan for last month, but you'll bump into the vowel teams as well. You'll notice that they always have a pink box to let you know what vowel team that is. So there's quite a few pages of vowel team fluency lists. So they're all within that one file, all of them are there. Now, if we go to the next step of the lesson, that would be the spelling dictation or word dictation and SOS. Remember, SOS is a simultaneous oral spelling, and you're going to choose any 10 words that you've used in any of the previous steps that we just saw, which is auditory, tactile, the tracing exercise, the sound blending that we changed into word formation, or the fluency exercise. So on any of those 3 steps, you'll choose any 10 words. Remember, you can always do 5 to 10 words. And you're going to dictate them to the students. The students will repeat them, and this is where they're going to start writing down those words as well. Remember, anything that the students write, anything that the students manipulate and do, you can take pictures of, and that's part of your students' work that you can submit along with your lesson plan. And then I added here some additional exercises. These additional exercises, one of them, this one specifically, is part of the additional worksheets, one of the files that I just mentioned in the material section. I took a screenshot out of it, so you can just take a page out of the worksheets and throw it in the lesson or as additional drill and practice. And here what the students need to do is choose the proper spelling of the words that have that long A sound. So like I said, there is no rule really to remember. It's just exposure, exposure, exposure. So you'll notice that all of the steps is just about working with words and really reinforcing that spelling of the long A sound, which, as I mentioned, there's 6 different spellings of the long A sound. Another additional exercise, this one I actually found online, and I thought it was good. It was clever to incorporate, and it was, I felt like it was going to be easier for students to be able to determine what is the right spelling or not. So you can use it as a standalone exercise, as a standalone additional exercise to your lesson plan, or you can actually incorporate it on the spelling exercise when you're telling the students to write the word main and they're not sure what the right spelling of the word main is. So you can incorporate that as part of that exercise. Pretty much what it is that you're going to have a table with the 6 different spellings of the long A sound. AI, AY, EI, EA, EY, EIGH. And then you're going to tell a word to the student, which again can be, if you're doing it as part of your spelling exercise, you tell them, write the word main, and then they can come here. Or if you're doing it as an additional exercise standalone, you just give them a list of words that you want them to enter in this table. But again, pretty much what they do is you have a table with the 6 different spellings. The students will be prompted with a word or a list of words. And what they do is write that word with every possible spelling. So the first word is main. I wrote in here with an AI, with an AY, with an EI, et cetera, et cetera. There, it makes it easier for me to see and determine which I believe would be the right spelling of that word. The second word, as you see, is the word great. The right spelling would be the one with the EA. And the last word is convey. The right spelling would be the EY. And there's certain concepts that you can definitely reinforce, like, for example, the AY and the EY that make the long A sound will always be at the end of a word. And on that same note, the AI and EI will never be at the end of a word, because that's just not part of how the language works. We're not going to have words that end with an I. So you can certainly, mention those concepts, but that doesn't necessarily say in other scenarios, meaning not at the end of a word, in other scenarios, why I'm using one or the other. It's just about exposure. That's why you want to get those additional exercises in, use as many words as possible so that you can really provide them with a lot of options, a lot of content that they can use to then determine, okay, this is the right spelling or the other. Then we get to the sentence dictation. Remember, you're going to use those words that you've been using in the lesson plan to form sentences. I always say that I like doing some sentences or dictating some sentences and then having the students come up with their own, which is also like an additional exercise or a twist to the existing exercise, so that they can also kind of apply what they're learning in a different way, as well as work with vocabulary a little bit more. And then the last step would be the max reading. This is where students integrate word recognition into the text that they're reading. And for that, you can either go to a max reading story, have them identify all the words that have the long A sound, maybe have that table with the 6 different spellings and have them list the words that they find under each column. So all the long A sounds that are spelled AI, all the long A sounds that are spelled EI, etc. Or you can just come up with a story using your words, using your sentences. You can have them come up with a story. Remember, you can switch things up that way, as long as you're hitting the steps. And then the last thing that I wanted to mention, this meeting, usually when we get the ball rolling with all the lesson plans and it's the same lesson plans, the meetings tend to be a little bit shorter. So the last thing that I wanted to mention was the Google Drive. And this is what I'm going to round back to what I was mentioning initially. I did notice that some of you have or are up to date in your assignments. I think Ms. Chancellor, I know you sent me an update the other day. Ms. Rose, I think, has also kept up to date with all the assignments. There might be others, so don't worry if I didn't mention your name. But I know that there's others that we have not received all of the lesson plans. Some, I believe, we have received none. So it is important that if you have them, make sure that you're sharing them properly. Remember that on the Google Drive folder that I always share with you, on the month 1 folder, inside the month 1 folder, you have instructions step by step on how to create a Google Drive folder, how to share it, how to add additional files to that existing one. And I think that maybe some of you have sent out like isolated lesson plans, and that's fine. Just make sure that you try and combine them all into a folder, just so that they don't get lost in translation. We have a lot of different groups of teachers and districts and schools that are going through the certification process. So just to make sure that your lesson plans are not lost and we actually do get them and you get feedback on them, again, make that folder, put your name and your district name on it, and share it with this email, ogcertification@gmail.com. I know that some of you send me updates when you do it, and I always tell you, okay, make sure that you let ogcertification@gmail know. And if I haven't told you that, don't worry, I always forward your email to OG certification because that's where we're centralizing everybody's assignments. So it is important that you create that folder, that you add the lesson plans and your videos and your students' work to those folders. And most importantly, that you share it with the right email account, which is ogcertification@gmail.com. So that's all I have for you today. Another thing, sorry, not the last thing. Another thing that I wanted to show you was going back to the shared files on the Google Drive folder. I have the presentation that I was just running through, the slides for month 5. I have the lesson plan that I told you that I already adapted, which I went through step by step, how we are changing the steps a little bit. And I said that there was one additional file that I was going to show you later. That's this file. This is just my template that I used when I was doing the slides for this presentation, like this one's. And I thought that you might find it useful to have the template already so you don't have to develop it from zero. Maybe you're not that familiar with PowerPoint and things like that. So you have this template here. You can just click on File. You can download it. I suggest downloading it as a PowerPoint so that you can edit it. So when you download it, you're going to have the sample there and you can just change the letters. You can just change the words here and make it your own and save you some time. Your example words, you can just edit it based on this template, change the color, make it your own, but you don't have to start it from zero. So, all right, so that's all that I wanted to show you for today. So now I'm gonna, as usual, open up the floor for any questions, comments, things that are unclear. If you're not sure if we have received your lesson plans, but you know that you've sent them, I can definitely check on that while we're together. And if you don't have any questions or any comments, you're free to go about your day. Have a good weekend. Thank you for joining me as usual. And I'll follow up with you all Monday, sending you the recording of this session.